everybody, and welcome to Kettle Kitchen again. And today we're doing Nostalgic Meals and Treats. Great collaboration hosted by Nessa's Nook. Great channel. If you get a chance, go over and check her out. And thank you for the invite. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go over our ingredients. And what we're cooking is what a lot of people would find nostalgic is a typical tuna casserole. I can't stand tuna, so we improvise and we add ugly pork, and it's an ugly pork casserole. Same theory, just different meat. So you're going to spray down your pan. So you need some spray, you need some butter, you need about 4 tablespoons of butter. You're going to need probably 1 package of no yolk dumplings. That's what we use for the noodle. You can use what you want to. Then we also need some breadcrumbs. You're going to need a cup of breadcrumbs. And then, of course, the star of this show is the ugly pork. We can this ourselves, and we will reserve the broth as well as use the meat that's inside. And the broth will be used for the gravy we'll put over it. So then you also need to have some vegetables. So we're using cut green beans, canned. And then, of course, you're also going to need to have some broth itself, in addition to what you get out of the jars, because that won't be enough. And then we want to use some corn. We do have the frozen whole kernel sweet corn, so we're going to use about half of that bag. And I would say it's about 2 cups. And then you also want to use onion powder. And then you want to use probably some garlic powder. And both of those will be about a teaspoon each. And then you want a teaspoon of fresh minced garlic. We're going to use salt. And then we're also going to use some ground pepper. And those are 1 teaspoon salt, a half teaspoon of black pepper. So what I've already went down here, obviously my video didn't take, but I have melted down 8 tablespoons of butter, and I've added in 4 tablespoons of olive oil, and I'm adding 1 cup of heavy cream, half and half, or even whole milk if you want to. And so I'm just stirring those around, making sure that there's no clumps that build up, and it will start naturally begin to thicken. Before I added the milk parts to it, I also threw in equal parts flour. So that got all mixed into a roux. And as you can see, I added 2/3 of a cup of broth. That was from the jars that I used. And you'll see it's not going to be enough, because here very soon this will start thickening up more, and I'll have to add more to it as well. So just make sure you keep that in mind. So part of what I didn't talk about was you're going to have some additional seasoning. You'll use salt and pepper. Here I'm using my cracked pepper. It's electric mill, sorry. That's where the blue's coming from. And you want to make sure it's enough that's going to flavor it, because you want it to stand out. Salt, we'll also add that in there. I'm going to say it's about a teaspoon to 2. It just depends on your taste. One thing to keep in mind is as pepper cooks, it gets hotter. So that's why I always try to add it in the beginning, and then as I'm thickening and whisking and all that, that gives it time to, if it's going to, mellow down, and then when I taste it, it's a little more where it needs to be. So now I'm adding in the fresh minced garlic to this, as well as the onion powder and the garlic powder, so that I can get those mixed in and those flavors start evolving as I'm whisking and going. So pepper also needs to be added as well, and the salt. I know I did in the beginning already, but I knew it wasn't enough, and I'm glad I did it, because in the end the flavor is right. So as you can see, it's beginning to thicken up. So I'm now adding the regular broth, about a half cup at a time. And then if I get to a point that I need to, I'll add more. But for right now, that's where I'm at. I'm turning the heat down a little bit. Or I'm actually, sorry, I looked over and my noodles were done. So when I started this process is when I started my noodles, so that they started cooking. So they're getting to that point. Anyways, don't forget to always whisk this. And you want to make sure that you're not scorching on the bottom, because that can become an easy problem, which a lot of you know probably from making it that is the case. So make sure you're tasting it, because this is what's going to go on your casserole instead of adding cream of mushroom soup or cream of chicken soup like most tuna casserole recipes do. I make my own. So as I said, when I was making my gravy, which will go into this, I was letting my noodles cook, and they cooked, and I went ahead and drained them off and returned them to the pot. So now I'm going to add the ugly pork. And again, these are cans or jars, excuse me, of pork that we canned ourselves. And you want to make sure you break it up, because you don't want it to be so chunky that it becomes overwhelming for people to eat. So once you got it in there, you want to make sure you break it down, and that will naturally happen as well, but you want to give it a head start. So that's all I'm doing here, is making sure it's all broke down as much as I can. And again, a lot of how much you put in there is dependent on how much you're trying to make. We wanted to make sure we had enough meat to noodle ratio. Once it's all mixed together, you'll see that that worked out pretty well for us, because you're going to lose some of that when you add your, in this case, when we add the gravy. Now, some people, when they add their soup, they have that. So, again, adding the 2 cups of frozen corn to this. And we will also add the 2 cans of green beans that have been drained into the mix that we're putting together. So when you get that done, now you want to mix it all together. But before, you have to make sure that gravy's in there, because that gravy is what's holding all these items together as they bake. And you can see it thickened up pretty well. I'm happy with it. I don't think it looks too terribly bad, because I like the consistency of it, and as it bakes, it will do that. So again, like I said, you want to make sure you're mixing it all together. And as you can look at it, it has the resemblance of tuna casserole. Now, some people would have used maybe peas instead of green beans. More in my family like the green beans than they do the peas, so that's why we have it. But aside from that, you get the gist and the feel that it's a tuna casserole. And now we'll get ready to transfer it all over into the pan. And this pan's been sprayed. Make sure you get your sides, bottom, and all the corners, so that it all is easier to clean. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and dump all that casserole in here, and make sure I'm pushing it into the corners so that it fills in as good as it can. And depending on your, maybe I should have used a smaller pan, but this is the one that we use usually. Um, but uh, you got to remember, the thicker the amount you're putting in, the longer it's going to take to heat to that temperature you're looking at it for. So that's the best advice I could give you on that. So before we enter into the cooking part, we have to do our crumb that we put on top. So I'm putting it on top of a cookie sheet, going to slide it to one end, and then we'll get the breading crumb that I'm going to put on top. So 1 cup of breadcrumbs. You can make those homemade if you want to. I went to the store and bought them. No harm, no foul. And 1/2 cup of melted butter. I'm just making sure it all gets mixed together. Kind of like a graham cracker crust, theoretically the same thing. You're just making sure that it gets mixed together. So now we have it all situated, and we're going to go ahead and put our breadcrumbs on top, and this gives it such a great texture. You get the buttery flavor, and then it cuts out some of the richness. I don't know if somebody will understand that or not, but for me, that these types of casseroles, it just seems to be overly rich, but this breadcrumb breaks through that. So for me, I appreciate it. It does seem like a lot, but when you cut into it, it's not really a ton there. It's just, I'm trying to cover it and make sure it's all coated, so it all has equal amount of flavor and opportunity to have the same taste. So go ahead and just clean off the sides, because I don't want it to really burn on the edge there. And then we'll go ahead and get it into the oven. So this will go into the oven at 350 degrees and cook for about an hour to hour and 10 minutes. Let's see how it tastes. Ooh, that looks so good. Ooh, hot. That is really good. Wow. I've done it this way before, but I didn't add a lot of the spices. And excuse me, we opted with the breadcrumbs. Awesome. Makes it taste great. Should give it a try. Hope you like it. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you.